This video is brought to you by GamerSupps, and good news, there is a sale going on right now where if you're listening to this video and it hasn't yet reached the 28th of February past 8 p.m. CET / 2 p.m. EST, then the sale is still ongoing and you get not just the usual 10% off with my code, although if it's after the 28th, you'll get the 10% off, but you will get 21% off everything site-wide. So that's GamerSupps. This is a lovely flavour. Lemonade, that's a great one. Cherry Lime Skull's one I enjoy. Sakura Splash, it's basically sour cherry. Guacamole Game of Art 9000, that's strawberry and lime. Goes together way better than you imagine it would. Also, as well as GamerSupps, there's GamerSupps caffeine-free if you just want to change the taste of water. There's Gamer Teas. There's the AFK blend to help promote sleep. There's apparel, shaker, waifu cups, everything on the site until the 28th at 8 p.m. CET, 21% off. Now's the time to stock up. You can also click to add free samples. Don't abuse that. If you try doing it more than once, they will fuck you up. Right, this is going to be another tier list. I did one already for Christopher Nolan. I even actually addressed certain things about Stanley Kubrick in that I might enlighten you on in this one. Now, I'm going to do it in a similar style. Like, I'm not going to give spoilers to the film generally, because actually, if I'm saying a movie's good or rating it highly, you might want to go and watch that film. And I think it's obnoxious when people just spoiler things. I hate if I'm listening to a podcast and it's like they suddenly start saying something before I can get to the button and stuff fucking pause it. I hate that. That'll make me not listen to the podcast again. So I'm not generally going to give spoilers out. I'm going to try and just refer to things in a veiled manner if you haven't seen the film. Now, in terms of how I'm going to do this, well, you'll just see as I go. I'm going to sort of give I kind of have my own perspective. It's not going to be a full movie review. It's going to be mainly a tier list, but I'm going to tell you about aspects of the movie as I'm figuring out where it goes and in what tier. Now, first things first is obviously Stanley Kubrick doesn't have a very large filmography, and this actually isn't even his full filmography. So you'll see down here, they have only got 10 movies listed, and he did direct more films than that, like I'll quickly show you. But the problem is, I haven't seen some of them. Like, first of all, forget the shorts. I'm not even going to watch those. I haven't watched Fear and Desire. I haven't watched Killer's Kiss. I have watched The Killing. It's not bad. It's certainly not a 7.9 out of 10. But it's not bad. That's not a bad one. That's actually got a very memorable ending if you've ever seen it. It's a Lee Marvin film. Why did I say Lee Marvin? It's this guy here, rather. Sterling Hayden, there you go, who you've definitely seen in films before. Obviously, he was later on in a very famous film, wasn't he? So it's not bad, but here's the thing. The only options for Tiermaker was like people doing all of these, and I just haven't seen those other ones. And there's also, this would be the worst of his films by my ranking, so it's irrelevant. Essentially, these are the films where Stanley Kubrick had like a lot of control, a little bit more debatable there, a lot of control. And so these are like the ones that are like his classics or his real filmography. Now, if you're wondering why, how's he only got 10 films? It's because he was probably the ultimate example of an auteur, a guy who just shaped everything about the film to his vision. And as the years went on, that became more and more and more so the case. And so actually the gaps between the films go up and up and up and up. So if you see here, Paths of Glory, he directs. It's just kind of a normal Hollywood film, really good. Because of that, he gets it onto Spartacus as like the backup director. Look, there's only 3 years difference there. Then Lolita, it's just 2 years later. Strangelove, 2 years later. Suddenly, 6 years till we get to Space Odyssey. Then 3 years, okay, not too bad. 4 years, oh, it's not too bad. 5 years, okay. 7 years, and then it goes 12 years. So you can see, overall, even if like sometimes he goes down a little bit, you've gone from like one every couple of years to like, oh, maybe there's like 3, maybe there's 5, maybe there's 7, maybe there's fucking 12, homie. Maybe I do it when I'm ready. Except that's the thing. It's not quite that. It is one that eventually it got. I'll give you a special undercurrent reason as to why this might be, or I'll allude to it. It essentially became that it's not even like these were all like insane smashes at the box office. It's just that he actually became one of those like studio darlings where basically they gave him the green light. He could just do whatever he wanted, could take however he wanted. And then also, crucially, if you've ever watched, there's actually a very good documentary that's narrated by Tom Cruise called like A Life in Pictures or something like that, about Stanley Kubrick. I've watched pretty much every Stanley Kubrick documentary I could ever watch. He's another person I've like studied a lot. I've even personally actually purchased the book of all the notes and photographs and set design stuff he did for a Napoleon film that was never to be made. So another reason why there's a big gap as well is because since he was an auteur and he had the ultimate creative control to manifest his vision, he also would do things like spend years researching. And I will say, he's someone where if you love his movies or you think they're excellent, I don't think they're all excellent. I'm not in love with all of them. He's one of my favorite directors. I would say this, when he nails it, it's worth all that effort. It's worth all that like minute detail. It's worth all that research potentially for what you could do with the film and then things you can even do with techniques like he did with Barry Lyndon. But the problem is when it doesn't hit, then he is someone who, and I've suffered from this as a creative myself, he is someone who maybe didn't always understand that the perfect is the enemy of the good. If you think of someone like Sidney Lumet, or Sidney Lumet, I'm not sure how you're supposed to say his name. One of my favourite directors ever. Very underrated director, actually. Now, here's the thing about Sidney Lumet. Sidney Lumet did like, off the top of my head, he might have done like 5 classics himself. Maybe he did like 10 really good films. Maybe if we're talking about just like good films, he might have done 15 to 20. The point is, he just kept working the whole time. And then some of them were classics. Some of them were very good. Some of them were good. Some of them were all right. And actually, even his all right ones are worth a watch. The problem with Kubrick is we only get the really good ones in theory, or they just don't hit you and you're just like, that's a flawed gem, isn't it? So I will say he maybe did. I mean, he's one of the first people to ever have the chance to do this. He maybe did go too far with it. Like, people like Orson Welles would have killed to have the chance to make films as often as this guy could, but they just couldn't get the funding and sometimes couldn't even keep the production together and then had to keep doing acting themselves to fund it all. So in some ways, that aspect is one of the reasons he has a more limited oeuvre of film. Now, I will say that plus the fact that if you essentially, there's actually one of the things, I'll be referencing this in this video, that Jason Horsley, his Kubrick talks about. He obviously also is someone where, first of all, just speculation, seems like he was probably pretty autistic. On top of that, I feel like he is incredibly attractive as a director to autistic people. And that isn't what auteur means, but he is also someone where if you're a cinephile and you love the idea of the auteur, he's kind of like the godhead of auteurs, if you know what I mean. So I think in that sense, he has an incredibly rabid fan base that will just tell you every one of his films is a Stone Cold classic. I mean, I think even Scorsese says something like that. By the way, I think Scorsese is a bit of an overrated director myself, but he obviously is exactly the sort of person who would think Stanley Kubrick is the greatest director ever, isn't he? So the other reason why there's sometimes a big gap is he also, like for example in this gap here, started to do things like research films where he went really into it, and then for studio reasons they actually just couldn't be made. So for example, he would have done one about Napoleon, would have potentially been incredible, but I think it's where, I'm going to guess it was around here, they already did in like 1970 a Waterloo films. I think that's the one that instead, because they were, Hollywood is dumb enough to be like, we've already got into Napoleon films. Like, yeah, but not by Stanley Kubrick. But by the way, the Waterloo film's certainly worth a watch, but it's not probably what Napoleon would have been. By the way, like a good artist, like my boy Alejandro Jodorowsky, if you don't get to do something in one film or overall, you put it in a different medium or a different film. So I do think, for example, some of the things he probably thought about for Napoleon went into Barry Lyndon. I think the sort of the setting of that film. You can imagine that with a lot of these things. Then also, there was a film he was doing, I think it was in the 90s, called something like, it's called something like The Holocaust Papers or something like that. It was going to basically be a Holocaust film, World War II. And then obviously Schindler's List came out way quicker because how long he was taking to research it. And so he did all this in-depth research. And then again, it's like, oh, well, he's beat me to it. By the way, technically, you could also count AI, directed by Steven Spielberg, as a Kubrick film. But that's one of those ones where I don't know how much of the notes was there for that, how much he actually did. I don't know how much Spielberg, some of that seemed a little bit saccharine, which is a Spielberg hallmark, you'll notice. So I don't know about that one. Don't know about that one personally. And don't worry, we'll sort of allude to some conspiracy theory angles in this because that's just fun, isn't it? And I do think what Jason Horsley would call paranoid awareness is just a valid lens. It's just not the only lens. The whole purpose of lenses is you put a different lens on to look in a different manner or model something differently. So we are going to go through all his films. I'm going to start in chronological order. I think it's just the easiest way to do it. Then at the end, figure out where I go. There's obviously no haven't seen. I've seen them all. So I'm going to talk through it all. First of all, Stanley Kubrick is one of my favourite directors. But if I had to list like top 10 favourite directors, I think he'd probably be down at like 5 or 7 or something. I mean, first of all, I've watched a lot of foreign language films, so people like Wong Kar-wai are probably in my list that maybe aren't in your list. And so I think the interesting thing for me about Kubrick is this. He's someone where, first of all, I would say when I watched his films when I was young, in the 90s and the 2000s, so when I was in my teens and then in my early 20s, I would say he's someone who a lot of aspects of his film were lost on me. Like if I was to watch something like Clockwork Orange, then I'd be like, oh, cool, hyper violence. Like, oh, this is exactly the sort of thing you want to watch when you're like a late teen, young 20-year-old, right? Oh, this is crazy. I can see this on screen. You hear it was banned. Like, oh my God, look at the subject matter going on. But the thing is, the sort of underlying tale of it, I'll get to this, you don't really draw that much out of it at the time. And you certainly won't necessarily understand illusions in the film potentially. Not the idea that he put them in there, but things that I would take from it later. When I think that with all art, what you bring to the table is going to determine what you're able to take away from the piece of art. Then, for example, Barry Lyndon, I'll just say it flat out. I like it now. That was actually a film I remember watching and going, this is shit. What? This is boring and it's shit. And what the fuck was that storyline? And why did any of this stuff happen? And what, I'm supposed to like that character. That's what it felt like. Full Metal Jacket. I think if you haven't thought about some of the horrors of war, and especially, I mean, look, I wasn't born in that era, so I can never know what it would have been like to have actually seen that when it first came out. Imagine it would have been pretty hardcore, you could say. Doctor Strangelove, I think the humour was actually quite lost on me when I first watched it. The Shining, I think everyone had seen that anyway, even if you didn't know it was a Kubrick film. That's more like you watch it as a horror film, and I will say, if you watch it just as a horror film, the last third is going to be really weird to you. You're going to sort of be like, what? Paths of Glory is just a really good World War II film. You might not even know that was a Stanley Kubrick one. To be fair, it was more of a studio feature. Eyes Wide Shut is going to seem very strange because he was clearly going for something very out there. And I do think, I won't go fully into all these aspects. I always just drop breadcrumbs. I do think that people definitely fucked around with that film. I think what is even left in the film at the end is actually incredibly sinister. So, okay. Lolita, I absolutely did not fuck with on almost any era. But to be fair, the way it's shot is quite nice. There are some good performances in it from some good actors. Spartacus is one where he was just brought on when they fired the other director by Kurt Russell. It's a good film. I already reviewed it on 4Play. I do think Gladiator is a better version of it. 2001: A Space Odyssey. I remember when I first watched that being like, I mean, first of all, when I'd never done psychedelics, when I hadn't had any occult experiences, I remember just thinking this is just a really well done sci-fi movie. A little bit dry, but then this is one of the key things. You have to be able to appreciate what he was doing with cinema there, and then also it certainly is a psyop, isn't it? So we'll get into that. I'm going to add these different lenses as we go. So first things first, in order, we're going to obviously be going to Paths of Glory, 1957, when Kubrick himself would only have been 29 years old. Oh, Kirk Douglas. When I say Kurt Russell. To be oh no. Why did I say Kurt Russell then? Well, whatever. It is Kirk Douglas. This is a film that I wouldn't say, that's probably a little bit too high. For me, this is more like a 7.5 out of 10 type film. I think it is a good film. It's a very good World War II film. For the era, it's an excellent World War II film because, I mean, you're still doing this in the 50s, mate. You're not allowed to make a lot of subversive films at this point in time. Especially not, by the way, think about this notion that you might portray the Allied side as having been corrupt or making morally incorrect decisions or not caring about troops, for example. That's a crazy idea. I mean, you can imagine how revolutionary this idea would be. We'll start already with the idea of the psyops here. So again, you can go watch my Jason Horsley interview on this channel. By the way, it's not like I subscribed to his whole theory, but I just thought it was an interesting angle that tied into certain things I'd sort of disparately discovered through being a Stanley Kubrick aficionado and knowing about conspiracy culture or conspiratainment or whatever you want to call it. So I would say, first things first, I do think a lot of Stanley Kubrick's films, as I mentioned in the one about Christopher Nolan, encompass psyops of the day. Now, look, you could do this two ways. I'll give you the normie version. The normie version is, you know how in rap music they go, hey, man, we just reflect what we see in our culture, bro. Know what I'm saying? And so I'm just a product of my environment, aren't I? Where it's like, actually, if you actually go and look at the history of that type of hip-hop and gangster rap, you will actually find it is funded not by people from their communities, with quite an interesting agenda. And almost certainly, it's also supposed to actually shape culture and be aspirational for people within those communities. That's what I would say about hip hop. So actually, I'd say they have it ass backwards there, because guess what? The mainstream, the way they lie to you is they don't just tell you what's blatantly not true. They take the truth and they invert it. That's actually an occult technique, if you don't know. You take a positive symbol in the occult and then you invert it to infer the negative or a dark side. So the reason that's genius is when you take the truth and you twist it, then it still has some essence of the truth in there. So some of it goes down and you're like, there's something here. This is something real. But that's also why there's that great like Tolkien quote, which has been bastardized, but essentially it's been changed to like, evil can only take what good creates and twist it, can't it? Like Morgoth did to those creatures, etc. And Sauron did with Uruk-hai and all that, Saruman and all that crap. So basically, I do think that's a real principle in the world. I mean, essentially, without going into a whole philosophical thing, I'm not actually sure if evil actually has a true soul, if you know what I mean. It almost seems like evil is some sort of archonic presence or force in the world that just perverts, let's say, the anointed, the true souls of the world that have the creative spark. It's even why I actually think Hollywood, maybe we can bring this full circle, have to use people who have visionary minds. Like, let's think of the dark geniuses. Let's think of a Stanley Kubrick, a David Lynch, David Cronenberg, a Terry Gilliam. Notice how there's a genius there. There's a purity. There's a single-pointed vision, but there's also a darkness and a twisted nature to it that, I mean, I could give a million analogies. So anyway, we'll go through some of the psyops at the end, but I'll go through them one by one. So obviously, what is the psyop of Paths of Glory? Well, you're taking the concept of going to war, which, remember, especially before the World Wars, is an incredibly patriotic thing to do. As a soldier, this is what's crazy. It's one of the things this movie does. As a soldier, you don't actually think to yourself when you sign up, why am I signing up? You sign up because they say, I need you to come and fight and defend the honor, the empire, to defend the USA, and Uncle Sam needs you because your country needs you. We need to fight them over there. We need to get them there. We're going to make the country great. You're just signing up for that. You're just rah, rah, rah. You go sign up to what young men want. They want purpose in life. They want a battle. They want to test themselves in the field of war. They want to come home and have the spoils, have the wife, have the family, have the white picket fence, have it all, tell the tales. But obviously, as wars have gotten more and more and more advanced, they've become darker and darker and darker, haven't they? So it's gotten to the point where obviously people were coming home from these wars and going, well, either first of all, we didn't come home, or I'm fucked up physically, or I'm psychologically fucked up. And then I would say this film is actually about the notion, which necessarily is, just because it's a psyop doesn't mean it's always wrong. Remember, there's a kernel of truth there. I would say this film is about the notion, the subversive notion, that like war is hell, war is evil. Like all the people on all the sides are cynical and they don't really care about troops and they just throw them like pawns on a chessboard willy-nilly. Not even a good chess player would do that, by the way, but you just sacrifice pawns if and when you need to, not caring as long as you think you'll win in the end or defend your position. Obviously, they, unlike the Napoleons and the Alexanders, they don't fight alongside the troops. The generals are sat back, sometimes miles back, having whatever fucking mad lines, if they're French, I guess, or fucking sipping tea, or, you know, chatting on the wireless, depending on what era it is, on the telegram or whatever the fuck. So I think that's an aspect that this already does. This does lay the groundwork for all those films that come later, for, funnily enough, for Full Metal Jacket, for Casualties of War, for Platoon. These are the films that are born on the 4th of July, the films that are just about the idea of like, fuck the military-industrial complex, fuck war. What is it good for? Bloody absolutely nothing, which itself is a cliche, but I do understand the idea that industrialized war for profit or for like, the problem is if you say global domination, like some global domination might actually have positives, might it, depending on what you think of those empires and those civilizations, but I would say these wars weren't. These are the ones where all the troops lose in these wars. These are the ones where it's like everybody loses in war, but you lose more. That's the philosophy, right? It's not the glory if you go out there and you win and it's a battle and it's like Game of Thrones and we come home and we have the feast and yeah, we slayed them and now we gain this territory and this status. That's something we can understand. That's something that feels intuitively real because that's something your ancestors would have participated in. This is something else. I mean, look, if you want to go into a totally different side conspiracy, you could look into the idea that actually wars like that, let's just say potentially they're occult rituals. That's why you have certain symbols across yourselves, etc. Let's say maybe even one of the goals is actually to sacrifice certain amounts of people for, let's say, certain energetic principles. Again, I only drop breadcrumbs. I don't do the whole thing, do I? Because otherwise this wouldn't be a YouTube video on YouTube. I wouldn't have a YouTube channel and I wouldn't get to say any of these things. The secret is you don't want to artistically just say everything out loud. That's how they target you and fuck you up. So just drop a breadcrumb. If someone follows the breadcrumbs, they might find their way to the thing themselves. If they don't worry about it. But you definitely don't give them a whole fucking loaf of bread and tell them where the bakery is. So Paths of Glory, I'm going to immediately put in B. It is a good film. By the way, Kirk Douglas is a fabulous actor. He's one of the last in that era of that generation of people who play the films very straight, but they are fabulous as heroes, as anti-heroes. I think, for example, his performance as Van Gogh, who I'm not even a fan of, in Lost for Life is a fucking peach. It's fucking incredible. You must watch it. It's really fucking really good. So, and also, by the way, if you do like Van Gogh and the romance of it, which I'm not that big a fan of, I think it's actually sentimentalized in these people. You would never even go near that guy if he'd lived in real life. You'd think he's some fucking weirdo and you'd think his paintings were shit as well, by the way, although his earlier stuff was not bad. Check out the one called like Loving Vincent or something. It's one of those like rotoscoped animated movies. It's pretty good. It came out recently. So we're going to put Paths of Glory there in B. It is a good film. Then we are going to go to Spartacus. Right, Spartacus, as I say, he was drafted in on. It's a mega sort of like super long. It's hours and hours long. Epic. The problem is it's really slow moving. I mean, listen, there's a whole foreplay episode where I review this with Richard Lewis and Monte Cristo. You can go watch on the LFN Culture channel. Essentially, I do think he's very good. This isn't his best role. Laurence of Olivier is mega because he's mega in everything. Peter Ustinov's really good and carries a lot of the early part of the film. Tony Curtis is all right. It's almost mad he's in this because it's not really like... I think he's been much better in much better other films. 7.9, I don't know about that. To me, this is more like a 7 out of 10. I enjoyed it. It actually doesn't drag, but it is really long. And I do think you could have cut a lot of things. Look, some of the sequences, especially for the era of the massive things that they're showing you, like battles, the chariot races, that's pretty gangster. So, but it's not, here's the thing, it's not really much of a Stanley Kubrick film for me. So I'm probably going to put that C, but I might consider putting it B. We'll see. Again, I put them like this initially, then at the end I go more harsh and give less only to the bangers. So then we're on to Lolita. As I told you earlier, not a huge fan of this. I will say, I understand why he made a film, because I do think the book, Lolita, the topic is kind of sus. Like anyone trying to do some like media literacy, no, you just don't understand. He was satirizing or like exploring the topic. No, here's the thing, mate. At the end of the day, you do choose. You sit down there in front of a blank page and you could write about anything. And that's what you chose to devote your mind to. And again, talking about dark geniuses, if you don't know, Nabokov is actually one of the most skilled writers probably ever in human history, because he could essentially write in English fabulously, but he could also like translate his own shit into Russian essentially. And he was just fucking god tier. But again, that's the subject matter you're choosing to write about. I don't know about that, mate. You might need to go on a list. I don't know, your date was a typewriter, but what's on your hard drive? Hey, Nabokov? Because he is a fabulous writer. So I can see why Kubrick wanted to do this, but it's also one of his earliest films. He started, look how long it is, to be able to do a full-on film. And also, I'd imagine, because of the rights and stuff, there must have been some Hollywood involvement in this, where it was more of a studio picture to some degree. James Mason is always a favourite of mine as a character actor. I think he's excellent in this film. I'm not actually a big Peter Sellers fan. Like, personally, I don't find him particularly funny, by the way. Like, in most of these films, I'm not a Pink Panther fan. It's never been my shit, by the way. Which is funny, because actually, I do think he's part of one of the greatest comedy troupes of all time. You just won't know them. They're called The Goons. And look up something called The Goon Show. It used to be a radio show. That is fantastic. But that's more like Spike Milligan type stuff. I never personally found Peter Sellers that funny, personally. So for me, in this, it's almost like he's doing a Jim Carrey, isn't it? It's like, oh, it's a comedian, but in a serious role. And what do you do then? Well, the best thing, like Robin Williams later on, is make them a villain, right? So... to me, he doesn't really pull it off. Like, spoiler, I'm going to actually hurt a lot of people's feelings right now. There's a Lolita that was made in the 90s with Jeremy Irons. And first of all, Jeremy Irons is a banger actor. But more importantly, they have... Fuck, I'm going to have to look up his name now. It's the one from 1997. What's his name? It has Frank Langella as the character that Peter Sellers plays. And Frank Langella is a fucking goated, like theatre level Shakespearean type actor. And he fucking kills that role. He is actually fucking sick in that role. That, just worth watching the movie for him alone. Even though maybe it's also a little bit more of like just a Hollywood film and a little bit more of a crass film. So I was never that big a fan of this, but I do appreciate it is a very beautifully shot film. You're already starting to see what Kubrick can really do with lenses in some of his shots. So if you're a Kubrick fan, certainly worth the watch. 7.5, that might even be generous for me. I feel like for me, Lolita goes to there, and I'm going to leave it there for the moment. Again, I also just find some of the subject matter a little bit abhorrent, quite frankly. And also, spoiler, I'm not French or Italian, so I don't think that's particularly cool. I don't want you to go, huh? But you know, Thorin, hundreds of years ago, before our bourgeois, Victorian Puritan sensibility. Nah, homie, nah. But go ahead, out yourself, reveal fully what's inside your heart and what your true desires are. Because I would like to know, just in case I need to take care of business. Do love taking care of business. So we're going to put that in C there. I'll go through all the psyops at the end. Actually, should I go movie by movie? I guess I did, because I did Paths of Glory, right? Spartacus. Is there even a psyop at that one? Maybe not, because it wasn't like his choice, was it? Lolita. Guys. If someone, let's say, was to be presented, like I talked about in the Christopher Nolan one, as an independent thinker and genius, an iconoclast and rebel who's fighting against the system and doing these films that society's not ready for. And they can't, first of all, they're telling you all the quiet part out loud there. Spoiler, they wouldn't keep getting a blank check and a green light like these two directors do by the biggest like media companies in the world. And people just go, can I fund that for millions and millions and millions of dollars? That's called you're being pushed by the system. But you're being pushed like Stone Cold. So you know Stone Cold in wrestling, he'd come in and fuck up the boss, Vince McMahon, and then he'd come in and ruin a match. And would you believe this? Vince McMahon was trying to stop him from winning the title. Of course he wasn't. He was fucking, Vince McMahon wanted all that. It's all a show, isn't it? Stone Cold was part of the WWF/WWE. Like, as long as you understand that, then you understand how he's playing the rebel, as it were. So let's say the obvious psyop there is, what themes in this film might sexually we want to change? What year was this? 1960? Oh, the 60s, early 60s. We're going to introduce ideas of sort of like deviant sexuality and things like the idea of like age limits and consents. And hey, man, let's all be hippies, man. What age is just like a number, man. Love is love. Like, bro, chill out, man. What, you're really harshing my vibe. That's not who Kubrick is, but I'll tell you what, you're laying the fucking seeds of that. I bet the fucking, what is it, like Haight Ashbury crew or whatever, fucking loving this shit, mate. I bet they're all over it. So, also, let's imagine what people who are like from traditionally powerful, wealthy and influential families, what sort of fucking darkness do they tend to be into, guys? Because, by the way, an obvious thing you want to do with psyops is normalize certain things. Make people think certain things either should be that way, that it's better that way, or maybe it always should have been that way, or it's even progressive to become like that. We're making progress, people here. We're more enlightened thinkers. Look at what the French philosophers of the 60s, what sort of causes were they putting themselves behind? What letters were they signing and petitions, eh? So I'll say the obvious psyop of this one's pretty fucking easy to see, isn't it? I mean, essentially, you're having to see through the eyes of a character where it's the same way I could say that American Psycho has some of this. You're becoming the person who's the deviant. You're not even just watching them on a screen now like old Hollywood. Like, it's a character, like a Hitchcock film. You're him. It may as well be through his eyes. Like, and then there she is. And then, I must have. Like, mate. All I'm saying is this, Kubrick. You're dead now, but you could go on the same fucking list as Nabokov, especially this film here, even if people might say, maybe I'll get to it, maybe that was your way of trying to have confession, as it were, and get it off your chest right before the end. Did you do it in time? Who knows? Maybe he's looking up at us now. I don't really know, by the way, that there actually is like a spiritual hell like that. I actually feel like hell is what you make in the real world of your spiritual reality now, and that you're feeling towards the world and how your imagination it will make your life a hell in the most mundane and the grandiose senses. So, not really feeling Lolita in that sense. Then we will go to Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. Now, what's funny about this is it's playing on the idea that you stopped worrying and loved the bomb, but it's in 1964. Now, in 1960s, let's just look something up here. I've just looked up the date of the Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962, of course. So essentially, that's when people were already doing that bollocks with like, oh, the fucking atomic clock's going to tick up. Oh my God, the whole world's going to go crazy. This is playing right into that. The whole thing here is like, it's already some harebrained fucking nonsense and happenstance that doesn't happen, that we don't just fuck our whole planet to ruin the whole realm and destroy our lives. And oh my God, is that the thread that everything hangs by? They're all lunatics in the military. Another subversive film about the military, you'll notice. They're all just incompetent and weirdos and fucking lunatics. By the way, I actually think in the military, you're going to get incredibly competent people. Yeah, you're going to have certainly some fucked up people politically and in certain positions, but that's actually quite a fucked up idea. So why actually, in fact, it does have a code of brotherhood, and some of those things clearly are inherently necessary, otherwise you wouldn't get the right people to fight in it. First of all, again, I'm not a huge Peter Sellers fan. I will say over the years, I've gotten better more and more to appreciate this film. I do really like George C. Scott, always enjoyed him in films. So I would say about this film that it is good. Some of the humour works for me, some of it doesn't. The overall plot, it's funny. I do like the certain characters Peter Sellers plays within it. Not necessarily one of my favourite films, though. I think I'm going to put that C for now, and I'll consider putting it to B. Let me think on that one. I'll think about that. The psyop there is, though, if anything, you leave that thinking more about the reality of nuclear war and bombs being dropped, don't you? Playing right into the psyop of the Cold War, by the way. If you don't know, part of the genius of the Cold War was, it's even been admitted later. So, you know, supposedly they say the Russians would do those big parades, China still does it now, where you have like the nukes and the big missiles coming out and all the, oh my God, look at this. And then supposedly what they would do is just like have a route where they'd loop some of them around the back and you wouldn't notice that was just the same thing that was coming through. So you go, oh my God, look how many have they got. The joke is the CIA like, oh, accidentally didn't know that, but maybe they did. And then intelligence, I've even said the fucking name there, intelligence agencies, alphabet agencies would just sort of like themselves get that data and cook it and go, oh no, look. If you don't know, here's the joke of the Cold War. Supposedly, the Western generals and all those people used to just constantly like saber rattle and tell their military, like the government, we need more and more and more funding. And what they would do is they would always make it sound like they were actually slightly behind. And suddenly the Russians had all the most insane tech and planes and radar and this. And if we don't do build more. So I would say this sort of a film, I don't really know that actually. To me, the whole thing of like, oh, it's actually just to make it irreverent and funny and like, let's not take it too seriously. There is. By the way, don't take it seriously. Nothing to worry about. Just live your little life in Hobbiton. Don't have any fucking worry about what's going on in Mordor. If it was real, you'd be dead anyway. If it isn't, no point fucking worrying about it, is there? But I will say this. It only works in that sarcastic sense in the same way as if I go, don't think about a pink elephant. And your brain just thought of a pink elephant. But I said, don't do it. Because your brain, your subconscious doesn't interpret the negative in the same particular way there. It still inherently has to think of the positive to then dismiss it, doesn't it? So I would say it's actually a film to make you incredibly preoccupied about nuclear war. But we'll keep going. Then we go to 2001: A Space Odyssey. This is the one where I say it was very dry the first time I watched it. And I definitely didn't understand some of the bigger themes. I do think this is one of his first films that is actually genius. Like this film, I'm going to immediately put A tier. This could go into S tier. It has to go in S tier, and here's why. Because it's not actually a film that you watch for pure pleasure. You do watch this. This is going to come into the psyop. You do watch this in the sense of, it is like someone took a camera I'll say in different periods of time. Let's just say what people want us to think with periods of time: the past, the present, the future, infinity. I would say it is like someone was able to statically film those things, and you're observing it, and you're seeing these things play out. That in itself is incredible. Also, this is where it ties into the PSYOP. If you don't know, some of the incredible shots of like spacecraft, docking, satellites, if you don't know, let me just quickly show you. 1968. What year was the moon landing, guys? Well, we're told 1969 was when man landed on the moon. What? So he's doing some of this shit from imagination, by the way. But think about how many things like a rotating satellite like that or space station, how many of those things, first of all, are in all of the media after this, but then secondly, is how you and your brain think of what space travel would be and what the future would be. And by the way, this is almost before the 70s. In the 70s, people like Robert Anton Wilson and loads of the cutting edge people and the psychedelic people like Timothy Leary, they all believed that because in 10, 20 years, there was going to be life extension. They were essentially the proto-transhumanists. Because you'd have life extension, we'd then also all go to the stars. We'd all go outside the planet, and then you'd be in fucking deep space on colonies, and you'd have these lifespans of 100 years. They all bought into this crazy futurist utopia. Look up what the term utopia means. So that in itself is incredible, and it is revolutionary. And when you can appreciate that, it already looks great on the screen anyway. This has some of the best ever transitions between music. By the way, the soundtrack is fucking banger. Between music, between shots, some of the crossfades and stuff are absolutely fucking incredible. It's a little bit dry, but that's also because it's got like this kind of funny, the Kubrickian sort of detached, is why I think autistic people vibe with him, detached sort of perspective where you're just viewing things neutrally in a way and just seeing them play out, but you're not necessarily imbued with one person's side or this person's right or wrong. It's very morally grey. Obviously, let's get into it. So which PSYOPs are there? General space travel stuff and about how important that is and how it's a future frontier. That's where man has to go to evolve. Evolution. There's one straight out of the gate. It's right there. When you think about apes and the idea they evolved and that tools helped them do it, it's all in this film, bro. You're not thinking these angles, but you'll see as I go through all of them, holy fuck is Kubrick laced with this shit. But yeah, totally independent, iconoclastic thing. Just happens to totally align with essentially what in the modern day you would think of as a pure, rational materialist worldview that's about techno-futurism and the idea that humans are animals that need to be civilized and evolve with technology. And that, look, he then adds in a PSYOP fear of technology, just like the nuclear bomb. What's another one that's in this film? AI. Now, you might not realize it initially because people just thought it's just a computer. No, it's the idea of AI, the idea of artificial intelligence. This is one of the most famous, most quoted concepts that the AI will turn on us. It's either Terminator in the 90s. James Cameron certainly went an interesting way in his career, didn't he? And kind of became kind of an interesting, I could one day do a fucking one of these on him. Don't worry about it. But it's that's the go-to one. Open the pod bay, doors, hell, etc., right? You always think of that iconic line. So, I mean, he even has the PSYOP in there that AI wouldn't just be like really advanced computing or like mimicking a human mind. It would even then be capable, like a human, of almost like having quasi emotions and even having like, spoiler, let's say like self-preservation instincts, which is kind of an absurd premise, but okay. That's one thing they always like to bake in there. It's almost like it's not actually computers that they're telling you you're going to interface with. It's some sort of other entity that might have its own personality and wishes and desires and wouldn't want you to deny it access to your realm. And you, okay. I'd probably have to look into where space technology came, and if that in any way, rockets and jet fuel, if that in any way connected to the occult maybe, and then I'd maybe even look into, you know, those bad guys in World War II who were hella into the occult and psychic shit and space travel and all these notions of flying saucers. I'd probably look into if they had anything to do with forming the space agencies. Well, just another one of those breadcrumbs. Yeah. Oh, sorry, you've got crumbs everywhere, guys. My bad, got crumbs everywhere. So this one's just full of crazy psyop shit. I do think that the last segment is just pure art. It's just jizzing art all across the screen. It's unbelievable, isn't it? It's just fucking, it has to be seen to be believed. This is a film, ideally, you don't know anything about. You just go in, you block out the time, you close the curtains. If you've got a little home projector system like me, you put it on, you fucking make sure no one's going to call you for the next 3 hours, and you just go to town for 2 hours, 29. A bit like Interstellar emotionally has this vibe to it, which is one of the reasons I can't believe people can appreciate the end of this movie, but then they go, Interstellar's so silly with the Tesseract. Like, yeah, bruh. All right, this is nothing outrageous about this at all. It's a fucking film. Go with it, you moron. So I will say, in the same way as I say, emotionally, I have a hard time rewatching that film. This is a film that I think is one where it's more just like an experience you have once or twice every 5 or 10 years. You wouldn't rewatch this film a lot. And again, by the way, some of the shots, like anti-gravity things, the shot where they're running around, some of those are just unbelievable, and how he does the pen through the air. If you know how those are done, holy fuck, this isn't there's no CGI. This guy is actually out of this world. So this is an absolute stone cold, it has to be an S. It's just like an experience more than a film, isn't it? It's one of the most psyop laden, but fair enough. Then we are also, one downside I will say of this film is I didn't actually think a lot of the performances were that insane though. They were just good or above average. It really, that's the one thing I think this film lacks. It lacks a truly great actor, a truly great performance. But certainly a very interesting film. Also an interesting detail, by the way, I'll just throw this out there, is look up what the differences were between the book and the film. Like maybe whereabouts the, what were they even fucking called? Was it even called the obelisk? No, surely it wouldn't be called that. It was called something else. Wait a second. 2001. It's not actually called the obelisk though, is it? What's it called? Monolith. There you go. Look up in the book what's different about where the monoliths are from the film. That'll give you a little hint right there. Because if you don't know, the reason why planets are named after deities from religions, which themselves tie into mysticism and magic, is for a very good reason. It's not just for some cool naming scheme. It's not like they would have just named them in the modern day after Sesame Street characters, is it? Maybe look up what correspondences are. So I do think that's a stone cold classic. Then we are going to Clockwork Orange, a film that famously was actually banned in the UK at one point in time. Now, that in itself tells you something right there. First of all, oh man, the system is suppressing him, man. Yep, everyone I know has seen this film. How's that work, mate? Oh, it's banned. But then everyone's seen it somehow. Maybe they got it when it was on video. Eventually it was unbanned. It's been played a million times. Now it's been on TV a billion times, hasn't it? Oh, crazy. Like, one, the fact that it could be banned at one point in time and now it's on TV, that already implies society's being degenerated, doesn't it? Then secondly, like, this wouldn't even be an 18 now, mate. Then secondly, there's the whole thing of like, oh no, you won't believe what that rapper's saying. Definitely don't listen to his new album. Oh, he's bad. Oh shit, he's bad. Oh, he's so bad, that guy. That's called marketing, mate. So A Clockwork Orange, now I haven't ever read the Anthony Burgess book, but if you don't know, he does use some sort of a mishmash between Russian and English as sort of their strange language they're communicating. So you can still intuitively know what they mean, in the same way as if you read Finnegan's Wake or something like that, you'll sort of just get the hang of what they're doing with the language, even if you won't always necessarily know exactly what it means. I'm immediately thinking for Clockwork Orange, that's going to be an A movie, but I'll go back to that in a second and consider. Now, the interesting thing about this film is this does have some exceptional performances. So first of all, Malcolm McDowell is very good. Now, I do think he was a spotty actor over his career, but this is an example of a really good film. For some reason, he was way better in his youth. Later in his age, not as good later. That's the best performance in the film. Crucially, the interesting thing about this film to me is I'm going to draw a very strange parallel for you here. Has anyone seen the Scorsese film? Massive fan of Kubrick, Gangs of New York. Because one of the things about Gangs of New York is some of the performances from the side characters are shit and the main character, but some of the actual character actors are unreal. Like I already said, I think actually Daniel Day-Lewis might be the best acting performance ever in that film. If you think of, what's his name? George C. Reilly, you fucking nailed it. That's a very different character to the sort of silly, irreverent idiot / comedy characters he plays. it was in Brendan Gleeson, very good performance in that film. In that film, you have this way where in the beginning of the film, you're introduced to these characters in one mode of life or one way of being. And then later in the film, you rediscover them, let's say in the middle part, as people who've taken on different social roles. One person's a policeman now. One person's trying to become a politician. One person is now like almost like a nationalist figure, right? That's actually a kind of a thematic play, I think, on how Stanley Kubrick made A Clockwork Orange. Because remember, spoiler, in the film, the things that happen in the first third, when they're the droogs, but that term even basically means like friend if you don't know in Russian. If you go and look up what happens after that, he obviously re-encounters these people and he's been changed by society and they've changed their social roles too, and suddenly has a very different interaction with them. You could almost say, by the way, some of the psyop of this film is about the idea of like that youth is an uncivilized force that left to its own desires. Think about youth culture. It's in 1971. Will just run rampage over society and destroy and tear everything apart, even if they have lofty ideals that they're doing it for the Ludwig van and art and crazy idea and hyper-violence and things that seem very cool to a young mind because you can't quite grasp the reality. Maybe your prefrontal cortex hasn't fully formed yet, etc. But then later in life, you're forced into, by one means or another, voluntarily or involuntarily, into certain social roles. And from then, even if someone used to be your friend or your acquaintance, you will actually enact your own sort of violence. In fact, in the same way as the youth is using violence, maybe the state uses violence. Maybe it's even sometimes a kind of mundane violence or psychiatric violence or just an Orwellian oppressive political violence that even has Orwellian ideas and like you have to just actually agree with them and believe what they believe and hate the things they hate. You can't even have your own personal ideas. Very revolutionary stuff for the 70s, isn't it? Obviously, there's even like, I mean, you could say there's allusions to the idea maybe they were doing psychedelics or something in this with the milk, etc. You know what I mean? You could see some elements that you could layer underneath it. By the way, another film, I'm just going to say this about one of these dark geniuses. Mate, so there was shit with kids earlier. Fuck patriotism and war. Okay, mate. Now, if no one's around and we can get up to it, what we getting up to, lads? Oh, I know what we'll go and do. What? Mate, you're choosing to make these films. You could have made a banger film about a guy who had a fucking lovely dog and lived in a fucking windmill. It was all brilliant art, shot in an amazing way with the sun coming in the windows and then the art in the fields and fucking he's a artist or something and he communes with God like fucking Andrei Rublev. No, you're choosing this subject matter to make over and over and over and over and over again. Okay. And if you don't know this Kubrick stare that is in so many of his films, this is obviously one that iconically establishes and it goes on. That kind of stare, if you ever go and do that stare yourself in a mirror, it's demented. There's something really sinister about it. In fact, I'd even say, I'd be careful about this though. In the occult world, if you don't know, one of the ideas of a mirror is it actually has a magical quality. Obviously, you have to shape the image to make it like that way. And essentially, they're considered almost like psychic and spiritual portals. And I'll just say, I'll say don't do this and someone will do it. Don't ever go in, like, first of all, you could just go and look in a mirror, just look in your own eyes for 5-10 minutes. Again, don't do this, but if you want to do it, I'm not my brother's keeper on this one. You will actually have an experience where over time, and don't tell me some stupid, that's a psychological phenomenon where, yeah, that's just called where you explain away occult phenomenon, mate. That's just someone else who have their own funding and their own sinister ideology explaining away occult phenomenon. You go, oh, is that just the idiomatic effect? Huh, well then I guess it wasn't one of us moving it, but it moved. You know what, shut the fuck up. Just get the fuck out. You don't get it and you are just a well-actually guy who's just, the first time you get to an answer that seems to make sense, you just take it and swallow it because you want it to be true. So what I'll say is you will actually have an experience where you might even see other faces in your own. It might morph between other things. Some people in the occult world think you're seeing, I don't know, past lives or some crazy shit like that. By the way, I don't do that on psychedelics, but if you do, you might have a really bad time. That's all I'm going to say. So I'll just say this sort of a demented look, there is something about this that almost expresses like a kind of psychopathy. This isn't just someone like, oh. It's like there's something dark about when people look with that sort of, if you ever see anyone with eyes like that in real life, get the fuck away from them ASAP. It's not going to be good for you. So I do think this is a pretty good film. And obviously, by the way, it's another film where another part of the psyop is, it's a downer, isn't it? It's a dystopia. This is what we're all going to end up in. So you know what? Bloody hell. May as well just get on and enjoy some music, drink some milk, fuck around. What can we do, eh? We're just being crushed like ants under the steamroller of techno-futuristic society. What can we do? I hate stuff like that, by the way. I hate that sort of mentality. That's like, you're fucking saying like, oh, we have to live in Saruman's system where we're chopping down all the forests. Like, nah, mate, we can battle against it. Question is, who are the Ents? And who are the people who potentially fight for the light, as it were? So, yeah, that could be a solid A for now. Then we are going to go to Barry Lyndon. Easily the most misunderstood film by me. As I told you, I didn't think it was a particularly good film, first of all. First of all, I appreciate it a lot more now because I am English and British, so that angle's interesting. Secondly, it really is attempted to be a period piece. I do think one of the key things about this film to really appreciate is, think of it as the best art gallery in the world with incredible... If you've ever been to like the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, they don't just have like a picture like that on the wall. They have like giant pictures that are like fucking the size of a wall of the most incredible fucking things. It's not about hyperrealism. It's about just showing in art these scenes and these images and these emotions and these colours. And when you see it, you go, fucking hell, you could just sit there and just look at that for ages, couldn't you? Imagine an art museum like that, and then it's moving. And it's shot with amazing camera techniques and stuff. So first of all, if you don't know, he did some incredible stuff with cameras in the light, in the dark rather, to show the candle scenes. Those are just unbelievable technical accomplishments. Then also he actually did, you know, the whole every frame of painting. That must have come from this film, the notion, because this is a film where he was actually inspired by this incredible pastoral art. And he's making shots and scenes and the lens look at things like that. I mean, even that one where that image of that they often use for the poster where he's like sitting all like sort of sat back when he's all fucked up and drunk in the gambling scenes with like a shoe off or whatever. Bro, the amount of artists of that era that did that sort of strange framing of the characters, etc. It's just aesthetically an incredible film. Like, put it this way, if you like to Puff the Magic Dragon and you can handle like seeping into art. I like to read European comics, so I do like really high intellectual stuff. This is the sort of film you could just fucking get lost in, mate. Same with 2001 and Space Odyssey. This is one where you can go deep on this one. The story is not particularly satisfying. It's a very strange story. The character himself, I don't actually know what the book was like, but the character himself is a very peculiar protagonist, if he is one. Ryan O'Neal does a good job. I don't know that he's exceptional. I think he's been better in other films. The joke is, actually, one of his best roles is in X-Men, believe it or not, but people are going to think I'm joking. Some of the other roles are... I didn't think this was like exceptional in terms of acting, but I do think it's a very interesting film. I maybe even would give it an 8 out of 10 or a 7.5 out of 10 just for the aesthetics alone. It's also 3 hours long, so it doesn't take any prisoners, this film, I'll tell you that. I think I'm going to put it A for now. I'm going to put it here for now. I actually don't even know what... Oh, no. My bad. You think, what's the psyop of that, Thorin? Well, first of all, it automatically assumes this era of history existed and in the way presented here. And by showing you it, just like when you watch Spartacus, you're going to think, that's what it was like. Or, wow, I can almost imagine I'm back there, which is a key concept to connecting you to the notion that this existed and that, oh, so that's what morals would have been like back then. And that's what society was like. And that's what war was like. Interesting aspect. Depends how deep you go on all these things, doesn't it? But it is a good film. Right, there's only 3 left. Then we come to The Shining. I think a little bit of an overrated film. Like, I can't believe it's an 8.4. I don't know it's a masterpiece. The problem I have with this film is this. The central plot itself, if you don't know, it's quite different from the book, I'm told. I don't really know that I would say, when I've looked into what the book contains, this is a strange one-off film. I'll give you an example. There's another Stephen King film that this reminds me of. So Stephen King obviously wrote the Dark Tower series, right? Which is like a sprawling, like supposedly his magnum opus. I'm not a big Stephen King fan personally. But then there's that film that came out, I'm a big Anthony Hopkins fan, called Hearts in Atlantis. And if you watch that film, you're going to go, what a strange film. I mean, it's good, but what was that really all about? And what were those blokes all about coming and getting him? Well, that's essentially like one story that connects into the Dark Tower series. But because it was just one film on its own and it didn't mention anything about Dark Tower, you're going to think, eh? That's essentially, as far as I know, what The Shining's like. That's why they were able to do a sequel and all these other things that are supposedly more true to the original material. So already, he is very much like doing his adaptation. He's taking the material and doing things he wants to do with it. So in terms of horror, it's quite good psychologically in terms of horror, even there's a couple of very famous jump scares that are pretty good. I would say part of it even is almost atmospheric horror. It's the underlying outre nature of it. There's the bizarreness of it all. There's like a darkness, but it doesn't quite fully manifest. It's not like an evil vampire. So it's becoming weirder and it's throwing up things that, I mean, one of the things I do think is very clever about the horror element is the idea, if you understand, a lot of the occult is about the idea of trance. It's that you can go into a visionary state in which your imagination, your mind, your subconscious is communicating with other entities external to yourself. And when you do this, a very famous part of the notion of contacting external entities in the occult is the notion that you need to protect yourself and verify who they say they are. So a key concept there is the reason why, for example, in traditional ceremonial Western magic, they have the circle around themselves. Sometimes it's even literally made out of salt, a salt barrier, is because it's the notion that you sacralize this area as a protected area and a zone. You have a separate area, often a triangle, that you're going to project the archetype of a god form, a demon, and summon it into that, etc., into, and it's not going to be able to get into your area. But then the idea is, while you're undergoing this experience, you don't leave the circle and you don't break the circle, and maybe even whatever external entity comes along might want you or tell you to, or it could even morph and become someone you know, or someone different, or it could portray itself as an angel. It could ask to do it. Hey, I've got this is wisdom, come with me, right? There's an aspect of that in this film. That's what's creepy about it. It's the idea that this supernatural, evil, almost archonic force that's interacting with this world, or the consciousness of the protagonist, particularly in this case, wouldn't just be like, we're going to kill you, or you're going mad, kill everyone. It's like, how would it present characters and things that seem familiar to you with a twist on them to then manipulate you into thinking certain ways, and action follows thought. Thought informs desire, and then from that action is taken, right? So think about the bar scene, for example, and who that character was in his life. Think about the person who's the like groundskeeper, and then it's like a butler character. There's quite a lot going on in this film. As I say, the whole thing about like the guy where it's like, hey, you got the shining son, and then his son, that's not really very well explored, because that's just the part of the book or the film. It's just not going into that part as much. The ending's a little bit dark. I will say, by the way, we can immediately go into some of the psyop shit if you want to hear. I do think as a film, it's very slow for the first third. Middle starts cooking. The ending, it's very memorable. It's quite good in terms of the first time you watch it, in terms of psychological horror and even some physical horror. But I always thought the ending was a bit, I could take it or leave it. I don't hate it, but it wasn't satisfying to me. So what I will say, and especially, by the way, let's get on the psyop shit. The last photo, I don't go crazy trying to force things to seem similar, but that particular pose he's doing in that photo, again, it's all adding up. You're not beating the allegations on this one, mate. You're not beating them. Again, if people don't know what I know, then the breadcrumb isn't for you. Brush it off. Go on with your life. Don't worry about it. What else? I'm not sure actually what I would say, because obviously it's Stephen King material, but what would I even say? Is there even any other psyop element to this? Oh, what am I even talking about? Obviously, you're going to watch that documentary, Room 237, aren't you? And all I'm going to say is it is a smorgasbord of conspiracy concepts and different lenses and readings into it. But a very famous one within it is actually an idea which links back to 2001: A Space Odyssey and the notion of, let's say, space agencies. And I think that is, here's the thing. One thing I appreciate about theories and alternative readings, recontextualizations, is I like them just as lenses. First of all, the way you get into it is it's just fun to apply the lens and go, imagine if. But then it's also fun to go, what if? And that's fun to go, but why if? And I would just say some of that's presented as crazy and far-fetched and silly. Well, if then you just don't get the paranoid awareness like lens of thinking about life. And by the way, the key thing about that lens is you have to be able to put it away and not think about it all the time and not go into every rabbit hole all the time. And definitely don't tell people in your lives about these rabbit holes. At best, give them a breadcrumb. If you do more than that, you will be mental. You will go mental. You will ruin your life. You'll ruin your relationships, and you'll be a lunatic screaming into the void in a bus station somewhere, demanding that they. I mean, the sad thing is, if I even mention this, these are psyops themselves, because these technologies do exist. The idea that, like, they're fucking putting thoughts in your brain, or they're frying your brain with a scanner or something like that. You know the premise. By the way, spoiler, why do you think conspiracy theorists exist as a term? Why do you think tinfoil hat consists as a term? All these things are laid. These agencies know what they're doing. So I will just say there's obviously a big element of that where you can read into it different things about. Here's the problem. Gematria seems really wacky if you don't know about Western occultism. You don't know who in the world is interested in Western occultism, and you don't know that whether you think it's real or not, they think it's real, and ideas like astrology are absolutely believed in by people in very, very high places, including artists, and artists do like to, whether for psyop reasons or not, like Stanley Kubrick, inject that into their material. There's always a little bit of that venom that they put into the thing, even if, suppose it was supposed to be a healing medicine you were giving me there. Let's just say a sort of fucked up psychic adjuvant, if you know what that term means. Shout out Rudolf Steiner, by the way. That boy was seeing some shit. Jack Nicholson obviously is one of the roles of a lifetime. He is fucking insane. Shelley Duvall is annoying, but isn't she supposed to be an annoying, nagging wife who's a bit useless? The Danny Lloyd guy, he's on some Jake Lloyd shit, mate. I can just take it or leave him. He's just whatever. He's just a fucking kid, isn't he? Who gives a fuck? Old Man Carruthers, whatever he was called. Who was he even acted by? Scatman Carruthers, my bad. I'm a scat man. I guess this guy does a good job. He's barely in the film, is he? This guy kills it, by the way. Philip Stoner's Grady. This guy, Joe Turkel. Lloyd the bartender. Banger. By the way, I could literally, for artistic reasons and for how that scene plays out, it's even a mad ASMR scene, if you get that, by the way, I could rewatch those Gold Room scenes 1,000 times. Maybe I have. So, I can't believe I almost said that wasn't a psyop one. The joke is, people think that's the mother of all psyop ones. And also, you'll notice this film, like this one, people think potentially has a confessional element into it. And revelatory, but also at the same time plants the psyops even deeper, I think. Right, Full Metal Jacket. Oh, we haven't even ranked it, have we? So The Shining, I'm going to put B for now. It's a B for now for me. Full Metal Jacket. Right. Not his longest film. You might ask yourself, why make this film in 1987? Let me just look. Vietnam War ended in 1975, 12 years earlier. So why even make this film? By now, mate, we've already had... Let me just double check them all. Right. I guess Born on the 4th of July didn't come out until a few years later. Platoon was 1 year earlier. So to be fair, he'd be making it at a similar point in time. Casualties of War was 2 years later. I guess it's right in the same era, right? This is obviously another film that's about the idea that, like, Vietnam was a pointless war. It's fucked up. What were we over there doing? Like, which being made into killing machines. But at the end of the day, if you put us in sort of a private, spoiler, Saving Private Ryan type scenario, then we just got to do what we got to do, haven't we? And what are we doing? Think about how many things this actually psyoped into the mind. Like, first of all, unironically, do you know how many asshole Americans have probably gone to Asia and just said that horrible line to just women who aren't at all prostitutes there? That's a thing. Then you could also add in, although, by the way, obviously the woman was a prostitute in the film. Let me think what else. I mean, that whole thing about fucking the first part of the movie in the boot camp. You want to talk about a Kubrickian stare and someone who just becomes unhinged. I mean, they're sort of trying to imply they make you into like an inhuman killing machine, and that's like a character who just essentially like it's almost like he's a gun or bomb that went off early, if you know what I mean. I mean, I will just say the idea of born to kill, it's more like you're made to kill in this scenario, shaped into a killer. Maybe just look up, how do you give the breadcrumbs out, making them too on the nose? What about the idea you were programmed to kill? That'd be an interesting topic for a book, wouldn't it? Interesting. And certainly for war, you program the soldiers to kill, don't you? That was actually not very subtle, but whatever. Let's just see how we do it. Then I think this has some pretty good performances. Vincent D'Onofrio's good. Matthew Modine's all right, above average. Oh, I wasn't super duper vibing with him totally. Duval is obviously straight fire in this one. Very unusual role for him. Who else am I thinking of? Yeah, I'm not as heavy on the setup angle for this one as much. And it's not one of my favourite Kubrick films, I've got to say. I think this is a B for me. Which leaves one film left. Now, obviously, I'm going to put that C and make a lovely step pyramid. No. So, the interesting thing here is this. Where would I'll just put Eyes Wide Shut because I've already moved it. Where am I going to put this film? This is a tough one. This is a film that feels like it's on the brink between B and A. So maybe we'll put it B for now. Right, this film, his last film, is a film that is incredibly unusual. It's probably his strangest film. In fact, I'll go one step further. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't, you can, listen, if you bring enough to the table, you can take away a lot. So if you come with a lot of ideas about what it could mean, and if you psychoanalyze the film, I don't believe in psychoanalysis personally. It's not a lens I consider valid. I think that's actually a dark art itself. If you want to read in like people like text, what would you call it? People like to do things where they're like, well, this color represents his emotion in this scenario. And of course, this animal in the background, that represents it in the psyche, the id. Like, you can do that part too, but that's not my shit, basically. One of the things about this film is, I think the reason it doesn't make sense, I'm not going to go fully into certain aspects you've heard elsewhere, because well, that wouldn't be to give a breadcrumb, would you? But I do think there are elements to it that are correct. I do think that there are scenes that have been removed from this film that would make it make sense. Because the thing about Stanley Kubrick is he does have an Alan Moore, Christopher Nolan-esque quality, where he is someone who makes clockwork devices that are very finely tuned and precisely, intricately connected. So the idea of this film almost seems like either scenes are in different orders than they would have been, or because maybe he didn't edit it at the end because he was dead already before it came out, or that things were just taken out of the film. And so it's left to be like, look, it was a flawed gem by a brilliant genius at the end of his life, and then he died. So, you know what? Maybe he just lost the plot. Maybe he just gone senile. Who knows what it was all about? So I would say that part in itself is a little bit disturbing, the implications of what that might mean, if you can just sort of infer what those scenes could have been. I mean, a very famous aspect to the PSYOP, obviously not these PSYOPs are super famous, as in for... I'd say the conspiracy theory, it's not the PSYOP, is the idea of like that last scene in the toy shop and what happens with, let's say, Tom Cruise's family, essentially. That in itself seems quite disturbing. Then I think to myself about his wife and that sort of noble figure she meets earlier on in the film, and the fact that that doesn't seem to connect to anything else in the film. Now, look, this will be played off. The very clever veneer of this film, maybe this is how it was edited and how Hollywood presented it is, it's Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise are A-list actors. They're going to be having sex on camera and naked, and the marriage is right at the brink. So that's even going to perfectly play into the dynamics of it's like a marriage on the rocks, and this is all like psychological stuff, and it's about like trust and what it means to be vulnerable and what female sexuality is and all this stuff, which, by the way, there's a mad psyop as to the way she's explaining like what happens with that sailor, for example. The idea that like any businessman like him would just be like, well, of course you'd go. Oh, and you're the good guy who finds the bloody prosy, eh? Spoiler. By the way, one thing that's brilliant about this film is it's all shot in the UK. So he's able to make all those backdrops look like you're in New York. That in itself is aesthetically brilliant. Obviously, there's a really sinister element with the whole like going to these parties, etc. And they're just crazy sex orgies. Oh, right, is that all they would get up to? Well, if you say so. So I'll just say this: the veneer of this film is like, it's just all about like trust and like maybe the secrets and the Eyes Wide Shut is like what are we doing in our relationship and all that. And at the end, maybe it's like, I have to cede some of this to my family and understand that like we just need to go home and have sex and that. It's like. What's weird is it's almost like the act they do at the end of the film turns them on and makes them want to have sex because maybe they themselves have become embroiled within something. Remember, spoiler, I'm giving spoilers for this one. Spoiler, towards the end, there's a certain scene where his wife, let's say, is in a bed and there's something next to her that infers, or implies rather, that maybe she's involved with this or is going to be involved in this, always was involved with this. And maybe he's himself, in some sense, going through sort of a social initiation where he's at a certain level of society, where he's meeting and mixing with certain people and he's entering into their world. And will he pass the tests? Will he be horrified? Will he withdraw? Will he embrace it? Who knows? You could potentially draw your conclusions from the end of the film. I do think that it's why it almost becomes on like a low-level horror film, even though you're going to watch it like it's just a straight thriller and go, this doesn't make sense. Like, what? What was that all about? And what is that massive conversation around the pool table all about? Really? Are we really just talking about someone I helped? Like, I think even psyops of like how things are covered up, how we want to believe certain things so that we don't consider the horror of what could be going on behind the scenes. By the way, you don't have to battle those things. You don't have to tell everyone about them. That's a great way to fuck your life up. You just stay away from it and keep your family away from it. How about that? How about just stay away? Make sure it never seems cool to you or anyone around you. Just stay the fuck away from all of it. Don't ever go and do anything which involves having to take oaths, in which in oaths you have to say out loud that they can kill you or fucking expel you or do some evil shit to you. If you do that, you cast a spell on yourself, mate. I'd stay away from all these sorts of groups. There's nothing cool about it. It's degenerate at best and quite sinister otherwise. So I think this film, it's hard to tell. Because on the one hand, if I think of some of his other films, Lolita, what else? Clockwork Orange, The Shining, like I said, the ending of that, and maybe the idea you're part of some like invisible college type fucked up thing. Some of these sinister things make me think he's almost doing the thing where he's like implanting these ideas in you so they can fester like worms up in you. But also part of you, it depends what they mean by he died, by the way. Sometimes I wonder if an actor doesn't just exit stage left and become another character. Maybe not in our realm. I think that this is an example of a film where layer one is it's the sex and it's a weird thriller and he just didn't finish it, so whatever. Enjoy his last film, folks. But also by putting it out without those things and you make sure no one ever goes and finds it and finds out what. And by the way, you don't even get what I'm talking about. If you're going to go, nobody's daughter and one of the guys he worked with said that that's not what happened. You will always have a story given to you that you will believe. You have to understand that. If things really were on the scale I'm sort of implying, then that is exactly what they would say, isn't it? You're just not thinking it through. And miss me with, no, but my dad's cousin knew one of them and he said that was... Bro, get the fuck out of my face. Unless you experienced it and you know it, shut the fuck up. I don't need to hear you that. So I will just say, part of it, I am sometimes torn. Was it supposed to be confessional? Because here's the thing. If you think about the notions of what that would imply about society and international power and politics and figures, and then also the notion that this is a Hollywood film coming out, funded by the Hollywood people, like, even if I could believe it was confessional and that he was trying to like hint at certain things, the idea that it would really be like you'd wait until like the premiere and then they'd be like, first of all, the idea no one's watching the rushes and informing them. You haven't got any spies on your set, give me a break. And then that's basically the job of producers if you don't know. And then also the idea that they'd get there like, what is this? Boris, take care of him. Jim, we're going to need to edit the film. I don't think that's the way it went down, but I'm certainly intrigued. I think it will always be the ultimate enigma of his career, won't it, this film? It is a good film. I do think it's a very compelling film. The thriller elements, especially for the first 2/3, will enrapture you. You will really wonder what's going on. By the way, a fun game you can play. When you meet characters in the film, remember another thing about characters like Clockwork Orange, they appear in one mode of life, then you experience them later. If you're trying to imply that those parties aren't just weird parties over here with people you don't know, that's actually the people around you in your life and in society, and they engage in that, then that's something very interesting to me. Because if you don't know, when you meet characters in this film, later on when you're inside, spoiler, the house, and you're seeing people with those masks on, those like plague masks and weird harlequinade, etc., try and ask yourself, pause on each frame and say, could that be a character I saw earlier in the film? Is that why when he goes into a certain ballroom and he looks up at certain characters in masks, it's almost like some of them recognize him or he recognizes them? Interesting that, isn't it? And then obviously, if you wanted to go further, you could go on what does a mask represent? And you could even look up what some of those animals are. You could do some of that too, couldn't you? So there's all sorts. Got even the idea, if you don't know how secret societies are structured, you have the outer layer. That could be society. You have an inner layer where things are getting really secret, and that's top notch. And if you get into the inner layer, that's everything going on there. You're now inside. That's like getting the password to come in the house, isn't it? But then there's always an inner one beyond that. It's like the WhatsApp group within the WhatsApp group. You've got a WhatsApp group of your friends. And if you're the one friend that's not as popular, you don't know they've got another WhatsApp group. There's just 3 of them or 4 of them and not you. And that's the group they go in when they don't want to go out with you and they want to do stuff together. Essentially, there might be another password in initiation for inner circle that's even more extreme. And to get into that, you might have to be tested in certain ways or reach certain thresholds. So I will say this is a film that I think you can read a lot of interesting things into this film. And to me, I just can't imagine it really just plays as a straight script. Like, I just see it. Put it this way, if it was, then he was incoherent. It was nonsense at the end. That just doesn't make sense when I look at who he cast, how he did it, how he told the story, the way he shot the scenes, the way some of the dialogue plays off each other is really sort of intriguing in certain ways. This is a haunting film in many ways. Just like at the end of his career, it's kind of a bit haunting, isn't it? But it is more of a B/an A tier, because a lot of this you have to sort of read into it to make it an A tier. Otherwise, it's a B. So now let's think, can we redo this list? Because remember, I'm not someone who S tiers all films 8 out of 10 and above. No. This is more like 9 out of 10s. Nothing's 10 out of 10, by the way. So maybe that's a 9 out of 10. Maybe that's an 8 or a 7.5. Maybe that's a 7.5, but I think aesthetically it's a piece of art. Maybe it's an 8. Paths of Glory, he just didn't have enough control over the script, I think. Could have been a B, an A. Also, it's just too early for him to have as much technique. The Shining, definitely not. Full Metal Jacket's not one of my favourites. Eyes Wide Shut. I'm tempted on this one. Because if you don't know, one part that is overt within the plot, this is why I think the rest of it refers to other things, it just wasn't connected, is you also have to ask in this film, spoiler, who was the woman that who was the woman, let's say, that made a sacrifice for him? There's one really obvious person it could be, but that could be a red herring. There's a couple of different angles to that. Even one of those people's role in society as presented to you is a bit sinister when you consider the idea they're then brought to these things and they're not necessarily part of it. You know what I mean? That when I think about those aspects, it can be an A. It's funny because I've no doubt this is going to be my version of Tenet on the Christopher Nolan one. Everyone's like, what are you talking? That should be C, then this should be like A. And that should... So I don't know about that. Doctor Strangelove. The problem is it's just not funny enough for me. I'm not really vibing with the humour as much. It is a good film though. Lolita. Problem is, if I put that there, that does seem probably more right. This might be my list. I'll do what the order is as well. What are the best films here? Might actually be that order. What about down here? Maybe I'd go... I think that's going to be my order. Now, let me just think. Did I miss anything with all the psyops and stuff? Oh yeah, essentially, I'll just say a little bit like I said in the Nolan movie. This is someone like Christopher Nolan. I believe that's actually his successor in terms of his role in society and art. I do think he's someone where essentially he represented major psyops of almost every decade. You've got AI, space travel, futurism, secret societies, occult possession, subversive attitudes towards war, nihilistic attitudes towards war, very much in Full Metal Jacket. The notion that like nuclear war or some sort of a force that will wipe out everything you know in life is ever present, whether you take that with a pinch of salt and you just laugh at it, or whether that depresses you and again nihilistically claws it. If you don't know Kubrick's philosophy, it seems like he didn't actually have a religious worldview or a mystical worldview. He had this thing where he was like, it's up to us to provide the light in the darkness. Like, that sounds like something a little bit satanic, mate, if you know what I mean. That sounds like something that actually, because remember, they always present themselves inverted. It's like, we are the children of the light. We are Prometheus. We're bringing it to humanity like the fucking monolith. It's a, you know what I mean? There's a little bit about that that's sort of like, all right, pal, whatever you say. That's a little bit subversive in itself. You've obviously got the idea of like playing with ideas of sexuality, especially, let's say, transgressive sexuality. I just forgot. Obviously, one part of the psyop in A Clockwork Orange is the notion of brainwashing or mind control. Now, you're going to think that's just nonsense. That would never exist. Okay, mate. I mean, that's actually laid into the film, isn't it? What else? I already did most of them, I think, at this point in time. I think that's it. If you enjoyed this, you can either sign up to my side channel Patreon, because obviously I don't get much for doing the side channel, but I want to do a lot more of this stuff on my stream and do a lot more content. Or you could also, while the sale is on, just get yourself some gamer subs, get 21% off using the code Thorin until the 28th at 8 p.m. CET/2 p.m. CET. You've got plenty of time until then. Everything on their site, 21% off. Without the noble families of the Italian city-states, you may never have heard of or been able to appreciate the art of some of the greatest Renaissance artists of all time. And similarly, my content on this channel, which I consider art, is kindly supported by Ibradiation and the rest of my Patreon supporters. Do you want to choose one of the topics that I might focus on next in a video? Maybe you want to ask me a question that I'll answer in a video AMA. Do you want teasers? Find out who the upcoming guests are for Thor Inquiry. Maybe you want to take part in one of those private, never to be released, recorded for your benefit discussions with me one-on-one, where you can talk about almost any topic, assuming it's appropriate. Well, if any of those perks or others tickle your fancy, heed this call to action and join Thorin's side today at the Patreon link in the description box below.